Maren Holt carried herself with the kind of steadiness that unsettled people. She was tall for a woman, with shoulders that had been hardened by years of chopping wood, hauling water, and dragging deer carcasses through miles of forest. Her palms were rough, her nails ragged, and when she spoke plain, too plain for most folks. She had none of the softness they thought proper, none of the sweet smiles or gentle bows of the head. The people in town noticed. They always noticed when Maren walked the single muddy street. Men tilted their hats not out of respect, but out of discomfort, as though her very presence reminded them of something they'd rather forget, that the wilderness didn't care for gender or polite manners. Women pulled their shawls tighter when she passed. They whispered to one another, letting their words carry just enough to sting her ears. Lives alone like a beast, hunts like a man. Strange, that one. Not right, she'd stopped reacting years ago. The first year she'd answered with a glare, the second with sharp words. By the third she saved her breath. A glare didn't change a whisper. A sharp word didn't stop a spit on the ground. By the fourth year she was a ghost among them, noticed, disliked, but no longer engaged. The only ones who ever spoke to her straight were those who needed something. A cured hide, venison, a gun repaired. And when they paid her, they did so with a twitch in the eye, as if ashamed to need her. What none of them said aloud was this: Maren was one of them by blood. She had been born in that very town, the second child of the Holt family, a line of farmers and churchgoers who prided themselves on respectability. She had grown up with the other children, had sat in the same pews, learned the same verses. But even as a girl, she had never fit the mold. While the other daughters stitched samplers, she slipped away to practice with her father's old rifle. While they dreamed of suitors, she dreamed of the ridge, the hunt, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. The town's patience with her strange ways had lasted only as long as her father lived. When he died, her mother hardened. Her brother Jonas stepped forward as head of the family, and Maren was pushed to the margins. Jonas told her she had no place in a town that needed good wives and good mothers, not wanderers who smelled of gunpowder. Her mother stopped speaking to her entirely. The breaking point came the day Maren killed a black bear that had been circling the livestock. She dragged it back, proud, expecting some measure of gratitude. Instead, she found cold eyes and the sound of a door shutting. So she built her cabin on the edge of the wilderness, far enough to be away, close enough to keep watch over the only home she'd ever known. She lived alone, not because she wanted it, but because she was given no other way. The truth she told herself on the long nights was simple. Solitude was easier than constant disappointment. Solitude did not spit at your boots or remind you of what you were not. Solitude only asked that you work, and work was something Maren knew well, and so she worked. From dawn to dusk she worked. Hunting, chopping, mending. She had made herself into a one-woman farm, trapper's shack and forge. No one helped her split wood, but she split it anyway. No one brought her venison, so she tracked it alone. If she fell ill, she brewed her own cure, or survived without one. When she stood in her doorway at night, staring at the line of trees, she sometimes wondered if the life she led was strength or stubbornness. But she shoved the thought away. She had no luxury for such questions. Still, there were nights when the silence pressed too hard. Nights when she lit a second candle, though there was no one to share it with. Nights when she turned her head at the sound of laughter drifting up from town, as if part of her still expected to be welcomed back, but the welcome never came. And so the years stacked themselves like woodpiles, season after season, building a wall between Maren Holt and the people she had once called her own, until the day blood on the leaves led her to a choice that would break that wall forever. But before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I've got something truly special coming your way tomorrow. The morning began like so many others, with Maren Holt moving through the woods, with her rifle slung across her back and a knife strapped to her belt. Hunting was never guaranteed, but she had grown sharp at reading signs. A bent twig, a fresh track, a tuft of fur caught on bark. By midday she had seen nothing worth the shot. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Even the usual chatter of birds was hushed, as if the trees themselves held their breath. It was then she saw it, a dark spatter on the leaves ahead. Blood. She crouched low, pressing her fingers against the damp earth where drops had fallen. Still warm, fresh, too much to be from a rabbit or squirrel. She rose, rifle in hand, eyes narrowing as she traced the trail. Each step pulled her deeper into the trees, her senses sharp. The stain on the ground thickened, smeared where something or someone had stumbled and fallen. She expected to find a deer, arrow-struck and limping, or perhaps a bear wounded by another hunter. What she found instead stopped her in her tracks. A man. He lay crumpled against the roots of a great oak, chest rising in shallow gasps. His skin was dark, his hair long and matted with sweat. He wore buckskin torn by a deep gash along his ribs, the wound soaked in red. An arrow had pierced his side, broken off near the shaft, leaving the head buried deep. His lips trembled with the effort of each breath. Maren's first instinct was caution. She raised her rifle, barrel steady, finger brushing the trigger. One shot, and the forest would be rid of him, and no one would ever know she had found him. It would be easy, cleaner, safer. But his eyes opened. Even through the fever haze, they locked on hers with startling intensity. They did not plead. They did not beg. They burned with a kind of pride that defied the weakness of his body. Maren's grip tightened on the rifle. This was no simple wounded traveler. This was a native warrior, one of the people her brother Jonas and the other settlers spoke of with both fear and hate. Harboring him could bring the whole town down on her. It could turn suspicion into open fury. Her breath came slow and measured, weighing the choice. Walk away. Let him bleed into the soil. Save herself or... Her gaze shifted to the blood soaking through his side, the trembling in his hand as he reached weakly for the knife at his belt. He wanted to die fighting, even here, even half dead. Something about that struck her. She cursed under her breath, lowering the rifle. "You're a damn fool." "Maren Holt," she muttered. She slung her rifle back, crouched, and slid her arms under his shoulders. His body was heavy, his breath ragged against her neck. He tried to resist, tried to push her away, but his strength failed him. "Save it," she snapped. "You're coming, whether you like it or not." Step by step, she carried him toward her cabin, every muscle straining. The blood left a dark trail behind them, and with each drop, she knew she was writing her own condemnation. By the time she reached the cabin, sweat drenched her shirt, her arms shook, and the man in her grasp was barely conscious. She shoved the door open with her hip and dragged him inside. Laying him down on her bed, she stepped back, chest heaving. The sight of him there, broken, wounded, defiant even in weakness, filled the room with a tension she had never known. Maren grabbed her knife and boiled water. Her hands worked fast, grinding herbs into a poultice, preparing for the work ahead. "You'll get me killed," she muttered again, almost to herself. The warrior's eyes flickered open. He looked at her, not with thanks, but with the same burning pride. Even dying, he gave no submission. And that, more than the blood or the danger, told Maren Holt that her life had just changed. Forever. The man's fever raged through the night. His body burned hot as fire, his breath shallow, uneven. Maren sat by his side with a damp cloth, wiping sweat from his brow, forcing spoonfuls of bitter tea between his lips when he stirred. Half the time he choked it back, eyes flashing anger, as if even in weakness he resented being helped. More than once, she asked herself why she hadn't left him in the woods. It would have been easier, cleaner, the whole town would have approved. But each time her eyes landed on him, broken yet unyielding, the answer settled heavy inside her. She hadn't been able to. Something in her would not allow it. By dawn, she had pulled the broken arrow shaft from his side, stitched the torn flesh, and packed the wound with herbs. He slept fitful, muttering words she couldn't understand, his hand clenching at ghosts she couldn't see. When he finally woke, it was with a start. Eyes sharp, hand darting weakly for the knife at his belt. Maren had already taken it. She pressed him back with a firm hand. "You try that. You'll tear your stitches open and bleed out right here," she said. He glared, teeth gritted, chest heaving with the effort of holding himself upright. He said something in his tongue, fast and sharp. She didn't know the words, but she knew the tone. Defiance. "You think I'd drag you here just to finish the job?" Maren asked, her voice hard. "If I wanted you dead, I'd have left you in the dirt." His eyes narrowed. Slowly, his strength drained and he collapsed back onto the bed. Still, the fire in his gaze did not dim. Maren sighed, setting the knife down on the table where he could see it. "There. You can reach for it if it makes you feel better, but you won't get far in your condition. You'll have to trust me." The word trust hung between them like smoke, foreign and unwelcome. For the next 2 days, the struggle continued. Maren boiled broth and tried to spoon it into him. He turned his head. She pressed the bowl back. "Eat." Sometimes he did, sometimes he spat it out. She kept at it anyway, stubborn as the rocks in the ridge. On the 3rd day, his fever broke. His breathing steadied. His strength flickered back like embers catching flame. He managed to sit upright without falling. It was then he spoke his first word in English. "Why?" Maren froze, the question hanging in the air like a trap. She looked at him, then at the floor. "Because you were dying," she said finally. He studied her, his eyes searching, suspicious. "Others would leave." "I'm not others," she answered, voice flat. That seemed to puzzle him more than anything. He didn't reply. Instead, he lay back, eyes closing, as if her answer was something he'd need to carry like a stone. Heavy and unexplained. Later that night, as Maren sat cleaning her rifle by firelight, she thought about the path she had chosen. She could still end it, still send him away, or worse. If she did, she'd save herself the wrath of the town. She'd keep her brother's eyes from turning sharper, his whispers from growing teeth. But every time she looked toward the bed where the man lay, she knew she would not. It wasn't pity. It wasn't defiance of Jonas or the townsfolk. It was something older, something buried deep in her. Maybe it was the memory of her own father teaching her to shoot, telling her to do what was right, not what was easy. Maybe it was the stubborn refusal to let the world dictate her choices anymore. Whatever it was, the choice had been made the moment she lowered her rifle in the woods. She had taken this man into her home. She had tied her fate to his, and there would be no turning back. The days that followed stretched long and uneasy. Maren's cabin, once a fortress of solitude, no longer felt like her own. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the fire seemed louder with him there. She had built her life on silence, and now it was broken by the sound of another's breathing. The warrior, though she still did not know his name, regained his strength slowly. At first, he could barely sit upright without breaking into a sweat. Then came the day he stood, leaning heavily against the wall, his face pale but proud. He refused her hand when she offered it, steadying himself with stubborn resolve. Maren watched him closely, unsure what unsettled her more, his silence or his pride. He spoke little, and when he did, it was in words she could not grasp. Only now and then would he try English, halting, sharp, as if each word cost him more than the wound had. One night, after she had finished sharpening her knife by the fire, he broke the silence. "You alone," he said, his accent thick, each syllable shaped carefully. Maren glanced up, caught off guard. "I am." He studied her, dark eyes fixed on her face as though he were measuring more than her words. After a long moment, he nodded once, as if the answer made sense. The question hung in her afterward. Why did he ask that? The townfolk had asked it too, though never so plainly. They muttered about her being too wild, too mannish, too unwilling to bend. They had called her father a fool for teaching her to shoot, to track, to ride like a man. And when her father died, they had expected her to fold herself neatly into a woman's place. Instead, she had built her cabin on the edge of the wilderness and lived by her own hands, alone. She had thought she preferred it that way. But now, with the warrior's presence filling the corners of her cabin, she felt the weight of that word differently. On the 4th night, she woke to find him standing near the door, knife in hand. The moonlight spilled over his face, casting sharp shadows. Her rifle was within reach, but she did not move. "You planning to kill me after all?" she asked, her voice low. He turned, the blade loose in his grip. His eyes were unreadable. Then slowly he set the knife down on the table. "Safe," he said simply. It took her a moment to understand. He wasn't threatening her. He was watching, guarding, as though some danger might come in the night. Maren exhaled, tension leaving her shoulders. "Safe," she echoed. He gave a short nod, then returned to the bed. That small exchange changed something between them. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall between stranger and enemy. The next morning she caught him outside, moving unsteadily but determined. He was trying to split wood with one arm, the other pressed tight to his healing side. She stormed out, snatched the axe from his hands. "You'll tear your stitches open," she snapped. He met her glare without flinching. "Strong," he said, defiant. "Stupid," she shot back. For a long moment they stared at each other, two wills colliding like flint and steel. Then to her surprise, he laughed, a rough, low sound, strange in her ears. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh, and it unsettled her more than his knife had. Maren shoved the axe into the block, shaking her head. "You'll do what you damn please, I suppose." "Suppose," he echoed, his lips curling into the faintest smile. That night, as she lay awake listening to his even breathing from the other side of the room, Maren realized the strangest truth of all. He was no longer just a stranger in her bed. He was becoming a part of her days, her nights, her choices, and whether she liked it or not. Her life was no longer hers alone. It had been nearly a week since Maren dragged the wounded warrior from the forest. She hadn't stepped foot into town in that time, but news had a way of slipping through the pines. Folks talked, even when they didn't know what they were talking about. On the 7th morning, she saddled her horse and rode the dusty trail toward town. Supplies were running low, flour, salt, lamp oil. She couldn't hide forever. Still, she kept her jaw set, as if daring anyone to look too close. The moment she crossed into the main street, she felt the eyes. Heads turned from the blacksmith shop, from the mercantile, from the porch of the saloon. Men leaned on rails. Women whispered behind their bonnets. Maren tied her horse outside the mercantile and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of cured leather and pine soap. Mr. Keene, the shopkeeper, gave her a smile too wide to be honest. "Morning." "Miss Holt," he said, voice careful. "Morning," Maren replied flatly. She gathered her goods quick, stacking them on the counter. As Mr. Keene measured out flour, he cleared his throat. "I haven't seen you in a spell. Folks was wondering after you." Maren's eyes flicked up. "Folks do too much wondering," he chuckled nervously. "Now, I don't mean nothing by it. Just you living out there alone, some say it ain't natural. Some say they seen smoke at odd hours. Heard shots carried on the wind. Makes a body curious." Maren's jaw tightened. She forced the words out slow, deliberate. "What I do on my land is my business." Before Mr. Keene could answer, the bell over the door jingled. Maren's brother Jonas stepped inside. Broad-shouldered, dressed neat in a settler's coat, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who thought the town half his already. "Well, if it ain't my sister," Jonas drawled. "Thought you'd gone feral for good this time." Maren turned, eyes hard. "Jonas." He leaned on the counter close enough to make the air between them tight. "Rumors running wild, Maren. Some say you've been keeping strange company up at that cabin of yours." Her stomach clenched, but she kept her face stone. "Rumors are a coward's weapon." Jonas's smile thinned. "Rumors are smoke, sister. Smoke means fire. Best not let folks think you've chosen the wrong side." The words hung heavy. He didn't have to name what he meant. Everyone in town knew the settlers had been pressing hard against the native bands, carving land that was not theirs to take. Tensions were ripe, sparks ready to catch. Maren gathered her goods, tossing coins on the counter. "You do well to keep your nose out of my business, Jonas." As she stepped past him, he caught her arm, grip firm. His voice dropped low. "Your blood, Maren. Don't make me choose between you and the town." She wrenched free, meeting his eyes with steel. "You'll have to make that choice yourself." When she left the mercantile, the whispers followed her like shadows. She rode home with her goods, jaw clenched. heart pounding. By the time she reached her cabin, she already knew what she'd find. The warrior standing in the doorway, watching the tree line, hand near his knife. He had felt it too, the shift in the air, the storm building. "They know," Maren said quietly. He gave a single nod, as if he had expected nothing less, and in that moment, the two of them shared an understanding. The secret was no longer theirs alone. The world beyond the trees was coming for them, one whisper at a time. That night, the wind swept hard through the pines, rattling the shutters of Maren's cabin. The fire in the hearth burned low, its glow flickering over the warrior's face as he sat across from her. Silent, sharpening the edge of his knife with slow, steady strokes, Maren stirred the pot hanging over the coals, the smell of venison and wild onion filling the room. She stole a glance at him, stronger now, though still pale from blood loss. His shoulders held a weight beyond the wound, something carved deep into him. She wondered if he thought the same of her. When the stew was ready, she ladled it into 2 bowls. She slid one across the table to him. He eyed it, then her, as if measuring whether it was a gift or a trap. Finally he ate. It was the first meal they shared without struggle. As the fire cracked and hissed, Maren leaned back, her rifle resting within arm's reach. "You got a name?" she asked quietly, "or do I keep calling you stranger in my head?" He lifted his gaze, studying her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then with careful English he spoke. "Kai." Maren let the name hang in the air, rolling it over her tongue. "Kai," she nodded once. "I'm Maren." He gave the faintest tilt of his head, acknowledgement but no smile. Still, it was more than she had expected. The silence stretched again, but it wasn't the sharp, suspicious silence of before. It was different, like the two of them had stepped onto the same ground without realizing it. Later, when the fire burned down to embers, Kai gestured toward it. "Fire keeps life," he said slowly. Maren raised a brow. "That it does." He pointed then to her chest, then to his. "Fire here," he said, pressing a hand to his heart. "Same." Her breath caught, not from the words themselves, but from the effort behind them. He was reaching across the chasm of language, of blood, of history, to show her something he believed, for the first time since dragging him from the forest. Maren felt the wall between them shift, just slightly. She added another log to the hearth. The flames flared, warm and steady, throwing their shadows long across the cabin walls. "You and I," she said almost to herself, "we're both too damn stubborn to die easy." Kai's eyes glinted in the firelight. He gave a short nod, and though he said nothing, she swore she caught the ghost of understanding in his expression. For a moment, the storm outside seemed distant in that little cabin, with firelight flickering and danger pressing close on all sides. Maren Holt and Kai, the wounded warrior she should have left to bleed, shared a bond forged not in words but in fire, and both of them knew, whether they spoke it aloud or not, that it would not be the last time they'd need each other to survive. 2 mornings later, Maren was out by the chopping block, axe swinging steady, the rhythm of the blade biting wood sharp against the hush of the forest. She worked harder than she needed to, harder than the pile of split logs demanded. The tension from town still sat heavy on her shoulders, pressing with every swing. She didn't hear the hoofbeats until they were close. When she looked up, Jonas was there astride his horse, flanked by 2 other settlers. Men she knew by face, though not by trust, Barrow and Flint, both with hands too quick to land on a trigger. "Maren," Jonas called, reining his horse to a stop. His tone was casual, but his eyes were not. They scanned the yard, the cabin, the woods beyond, sharp and searching. "Jonas." Maren leaned on the axe, sweat shining on her brow. "You ride out here for firewood, or you come with something else on your tongue?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Word spreads, sister, faster than the wind. You know how folks talk. About me. About what or who you're keeping under your roof." His voice dropped low, pointed. "They say you dragged a wounded savage out of the woods. That you've been tending to him like some lost pup." Maren felt the air go tight. She forced her face blank, her voice even. "Rumors, Jonas. You believe every whisper you hear?" Jonas dismounted, boots crunching on the dirt as he stepped closer. He was taller than her, broader, carrying himself like a man used to being obeyed. He stopped just shy of her, his shadow cutting across the woodpile. "I don't have to believe 'em," he said. "I just have to listen. And I'll tell you plain, this town's ready to believe the worst. You give them reason to think you've chosen sides, and it won't end with whispers. It'll end with fire." Marin's grip on the axe tightened. "Maybe the town ought to look to its own sins before coming for mine." Jonas's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing. For a moment, brother and sister stood locked, neither bending. Finally he leaned close, his voice low enough only she could hear. "Your blood, Marin, but blood only stretches so far. If it comes to choosing between you and what the settlers aim to take, you won't like where I stand." The words hit harder than the axe ever could. Jonas stepped back, signaling to Barrow and Flint. "We'll be back," he said, mounting his horse again. "Best pray we don't find what we're looking for." Marin watched them ride off, her stomach tight with fire and fear. When she turned back toward the cabin, Kai was standing in the doorway. He must have heard every word. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, unreadable. "They come," he said simply. Marin nodded, swallowing the bitterness in her throat. "Aye," she murmured, "and they won't come gentle." After Jonas's visit, the air around the cabin changed. Every sound in the woods seemed sharper, every shadow longer. Marin kept her rifle within reach, even while stirring a pot or mending a boot. Kai, though still healing, moved with purpose now, watching the tree line, setting snares, sharpening his blade until it gleamed like silver. It was no longer just her solitude at stake. In the long hours between danger, they began to learn each other in ways neither had expected. Marin discovered that Kai rose before dawn, sitting cross-legged near the door in silence, eyes closed as though listening to something deeper than the forest. When she asked once, he only touched his chest and said, "Listen here." She found herself doing the same some mornings, not in imitation, but in curiosity. The silence between them, once barbed, began to settle into something steadier, like a river running deep. Kai, for his part, studied her with quiet intent. He watched how she dressed a rabbit with swift, practiced hands, how she shouldered her rifle like it was part of her body, how she cursed low when the axe blade glanced wrong on the wood. "One evening," he asked in halting English, "your father—" "Teach," Marin paused, knife in hand, then nodded. "Aye, he taught me to shoot, to track, to live off this land. Folks in town thought it strange, but he didn't give a damn." Her mouth curved bitterly. "He said the world doesn't care for what's proper. It cares for what keeps you breathing." Kai nodded slowly, as if the words carried weight beyond the language. "Wise man." The simple acknowledgement settled warm in her chest, though she didn't say it. That night, while she patched a tear in his buckskin shirt, he pointed to the scar running along her forearm. "This?" he asked. She smirked faintly. "Wolf, young one. I was 15. Thought I could take it with a knife. I was wrong." Kai gave a low chuckle, the sound rough but genuine. Then he lifted his own arm, showing a jagged scar across the muscle. "Bear, I was 17. Marin laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in too long. For the first time, their scars felt less like burdens and more like stories binding them. As the days stretched, the lessons grew. Kai showed her how he tied snares with woven fiber instead of iron, lighter and harder to detect. He taught her how to listen for the subtle shift of wind through trees, how it warned of rain before the sky ever darkened. In turn, Marin showed him how to repair a musket stock, how to pour a clean bullet mold, how to stretch a pelt so it would fetch good coin. One evening, as the fire threw gold light across the cabin, Kai drew a simple figure in the dirt with a stick, 2 circles side by side. He pointed to one. "Your people." Then the other. "My people." He drew a jagged line between them. "Wall." Marin stared at it, then set her hand flat across the line, smudging it away. "Maybe not forever," she said. Kai looked at her long, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a single nod, slow and deliberate. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was the beginning of something neither of them had known they'd been missing, and both of them understood. Learning each other wasn't just survival. It was the only path forward in a world already sharpening its knives against them. The days had grown too quiet. Even the forest, once full of birdsong and rustling game, seemed to hold its breath. Maren felt it in her bones, the kind of silence that came before a storm. She kept her rifle close, her knife strapped at her side, eyes always flicking to the tree line. One morning, while checking the snares with Kai, she caught the faintest scent on the air. Not pine, not damp earth, smoke. Faint, far, but there. Her stomach dropped. Kai lifted his head, nostrils flaring. He looked to the east, eyes narrowing. "Settlers," he said flatly. Maren swallowed hard. "They burning fields?" He shook his head. "Not field, signal." The words settled heavy between them. They hurried back to the cabin. From the ridge near her land, Maren climbed high enough to see the valley below. Sure enough, thin grey smoke rose in the distance, curling into the sky in deliberate columns. Not the wild scatter of brushfire, but ordered, placed. "A message," she clenched her jaw. "Jonas." When she came down from the ridge, Kai was waiting. His expression was grave. "Your kin," he said. Maren didn't answer at first. She wanted to deny it, wanted to believe the settlers wouldn't move so bold. But Jonas's warning still rang in her ears. "Blood only stretches so far." "Aye," she said finally. "My kin." That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Kai stood near the fire, sharpening his knife. "They come soon," he said. "For land, for me." Maren threw another log on the flames, sparks leaping high. "They'll have to come through me first." Kai looked at her long and hard. "Why?" the question again. Always that question. She leaned on her knees, eyes locked on the fire. "Because I won't let them take what isn't theirs. Not my land, not your life." "Not while I still draw breath." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he gave a short nod, slow and solemn. The crackle of the fire filled the silence. That night, Maren lay awake, listening to the wind, to the faint creaks of the cabin settling. She knew the smoke was only the beginning. Jonas was stirring the pot, riling the settlers, turning whispers into weapons. And somewhere beyond the ridge, men were gathering. The horizon was burning, even if the flames hadn't reached her yet. The morning after the smoke, Maren rose before dawn. She saddled her horse and rode the edge of her land, studying every ridge, every hollow, every tree that could serve as cover. She rode not as a farmer or hunter, but as someone preparing for war. Kai followed on foot, still favoring his side, but steady now, moving like part of the forest itself. He carried his bow slung over his shoulder, arrows fletched with dark feathers. They stopped at a narrow bend in the trail leading to the cabin. Kai knelt, dragging his knife through the soil. He drew a line across the dirt, firm and straight. "Here," he said, tapping the ground. "First stand." Maren crouched beside him, her rifle resting across her knees. A choke point. She glanced at the ridge above. "Good for one shot, maybe two," Kai nodded. He drew another mark farther back, a curve that arced around the cabin. "Second stand." Maren studied his markings. "You've done this before." His dark eyes lifted to hers. "Too many times." They spent the day walking the land, dragging lines in the dirt, marking trees with notches, planning where fire could drive enemies, where traps could break their charge. Each mark was a promise, each line a boundary not meant to be crossed. By noon, sweat soaked Maren's shirt. She leaned against a pine, wiping her brow. "They'll come with numbers. Guns, too." "You know that." Kai's jaw tightened. "I know." She looked at him, searching his face. "And you'll still stand with me?" His answer was simple, spoken with no hesitation. "Yes." Maren swallowed the knot in her throat. She had lived so long without anyone standing beside her that the weight of his word, "yes," struck harder than she cared to admit. That evening, as they built a fire in the yard, Maren set 3 stones in the flames. Once they glowed red, she lifted one with tongs and pressed it into the earth near the cabin door, searing a mark into the soil. Kai watched her, brow furrowed. "What is this?" "A promise," she said. "This is where I stand. Where I don't bend." Understanding flickered in his gaze. Without a word, he took another stone and pressed his own mark beside hers. The smell of scorched earth filled the air. 2 marks, 2 promises. When the last stone hissed in the dirt, Maren sat back, her chest tight with something fierce and unspoken. For the first time, the lines in the dirt didn't just mark defense, they marked belonging. Jonas Holt was not a man who needed to shout to be heard. He knew how to bend a room with just a tilt of his voice, a look in his eye. In the saloon that night, every settler within earshot leaned closer as he nursed a glass of whiskey and spoke low but sharp. "They say blood ties bind," Jonas said, his hand resting heavy on the bar. "But what happens when blood betrays? My own sister's chosen her side, and it ain't ours." A murmur rippled through the room. Barrow, broad and scowling, spat into the sawdust on the floor. "Saw it myself. Tracks up by her place, 2 sets. Ain't no hunter she's keeping up there." Flint leaned in, eyes glinting mean. "She's gone savage. That's what it is. Taking up with one of them." Jonas lifted his glass, swirled the amber liquid slow, deliberate. "I warned her. Told her blood only stretches so far. She didn't listen. So now it falls to us to set it right." A voice piped up from the back, nervous but eager. "What do you mean to do, Jonas?" Jonas's smile was thin, hard. "What needs doing? That land of hers? Prime soil. Rich water. Should have been ours from the start. She's made her choice. She don't deserve to keep it." He drained his glass, set it down with a sharp thud. "We ride at week's end. We burn her out if we must." The room stirred with dark agreement, the kind born of fear and greed, wrapped in righteousness. Jonas didn't need to push harder. The storm was already gathering. Out on the ridge, Maren sat cleaning her rifle by firelight, the metal gleaming under her hands. She had heard nothing yet of her brother's words, but she felt the storm all the same. The silence of the woods, the restless unease in the wind. It was as if the earth itself braced for what was coming. Kai crouched across from her, whittling arrow shafts with calm precision. He broke the silence first. "They gather." Maren looked up sharply. "You're certain?" He gave a short nod. "I know the signs. Men move different when they prepare for war." She swallowed, fingers tightening around the rifle stock. "Jonas will lead them." Kai's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "Then you must decide." "Decide what?" "If you fight for land or for blood." The words cut deep. She wanted to say it was the same, that she fought for both. But deep down she knew the truth was thornier. To fight for her land was to fight against her kin. To fight for justice was to burn what was left of family. She stared into the fire, the flames licking high, her jaw set. "If Jonas comes, he'll see I won't bend. Not for him. Not for anyone?" Kai nodded once, as if her answer was no surprise. Then he set another arrow aside, his hands steady though the storm was rising around them. The fire popped, sparks leaping into the night. Beyond the tree line, the forest held its breath. The gathering storm was no longer rumor, it was fact, and soon it would break. The first time Jonas rode up the ridge, Maren almost believed he had come alone. His horse crested the rise at a steady trot. No men trailing behind, no banners of fire or guns flashing in the trees. Just Jonas, broad-shouldered in the saddle, his eyes fixed on her cabin. Maren stood on the porch, rifle resting easy in her hands, though her chest was tight. Kai remained in the shadows of the trees, unseen, bow strung but lowered. Jonas dismounted slow, every movement deliberate. He didn't tie his horse, just let it graze, as though he meant to be gone before long. "Maren," he said at last, tipping his hat. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Been a while," she gave a stiff nod. "Not near long enough." His mouth twitched, half amusement, half warning. Always did have a sharp tongue. He stepped closer, boots crunching in the dirt. "Words all over town. Folks say you've taken up with one of them. That true?" Maren's grip tightened on the rifle. "What's true is none of their concern. Or yours." Jonas's eyes narrowed. "Sister, don't play me. I've heard enough to know. You're harboring a savage on this land. A man who'd sooner slit your throat than share your table." Her chin lifted. "He's a man, Jonas, just as flesh and blood as you or me. And he's done me no harm." Jonas barked a short, humorless laugh. "Done you no harm yet. That's the trick of their kind. Smile one day, knife the next. You think you can trust him?" "I know I can." Maren shot back, voice hard. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Then Jonas's tone shifted, softened, as though he wore a different mask. "Maren," he said, almost gentle, "I'm giving you a chance. Sell this land. Come back to town. Be family again. You don't belong out here alone. You never did." The words tugged at her chest, stirring old ache. But she steadied herself, voice cold. "I belong exactly here. This is my land, my home. You and yours won't take it from me." Jonas's eyes darkened. His hand rested near the butt of his pistol, not drawing, not yet, but close enough for her to see the choice in him. "You'd set yourself against your own blood?" he asked. "If my own blood means to steal what's mine," Maren said, steady as stone, "then yes." Something flickered across his face. Anger, disappointment, maybe even sorrow. But it vanished quick, replaced by steel. "So be it," Jonas said. He turned, swinging into his saddle in one smooth motion. Before he spurred his horse, he looked down at her one last time. "When next we meet, Maren, I won't be offering words." He wheeled his horse and rode hard back down the ridge. Dust rising in his wake, Maren stood motionless, rifle in her grip, heart pounding like a war drum. When the dust settled, Kai stepped from the trees, his gaze fixed on her. "You saw," she said quietly. "I saw." She swallowed hard. "Next time, it won't be just him," Kai nodded. "No, next time it will be war." The weight of it hung heavy between them. Brother against sister, blood against blood, a knife between kin, and there was no turning back. Maren cleared the table inside the cabin, sweeping aside the few comforts she had left, her mother's cracked china cup, the small Bible Jonas once gave her, the scraps of mending cloth. What replaced them was harsher, sharper, a lantern, strips of rawhide, a bundle of kindling, and Kai's hand-drawn marks on tanned hide. This was no longer a homestead's hearth. It was a war table. Kai spread the hide flat, weighing its corners with stones. He tapped the rough sketches with his finger. "Here, the trail they'll take. Narrow, no cover, easy to ambush." Maren leaned over, rifle resting against her chair. "Good for the first bite," she said. "But they'll keep coming," he nodded. "They always keep coming." She pointed to the cabin's rear. "We can pull them this way, force them to split, make them chase shadows." Kai's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen on him. "You think like Hunter." "I've had to," she said, voice flat. For hours they worked, carving out a plan with nothing but scraps and instinct. Traps where brush would hide them. Kill zones where the ground funneled men too tight. Fires that could cut off retreat. Each line drawn was a vow to bleed before surrender. By nightfall, their plan lay spread across the table like a map of desperation. Maren leaned back, rubbing her temples. 2 against a dozen or more. These lines won't hold long. Kai's gaze flicked to her, steady as ever. "Then we must not be 2, she frowned. "Meaning?" He pushed aside the hide map, his eyes burning with resolve. "My people watch, they wait. If I call, some will answer. But they do not trust settlers. They do not trust you." Maren's jaw tightened. "And why should they? Folks like Jonas gave them no reason." "Then you must give them one," Kai said. The thought sat heavy in her chest. She'd been shunned all her life, outcast by her own kind. And now she would ask others, people with every reason to despise her, for help. She wanted to laugh at the bitter irony, but the fire in Kai's eyes held her steady. Finally she nodded. "Then let's call them." That night they carried the war table outside, laying the hide flat beneath the stars. Kai lit a small fire, feeding it with dried sage and pine needles, until smoke curled skyward, sharp and thick. He stood tall, chanting low, his voice a steady rhythm against the silence of the forest. Maren watched, uneasy but resolute. She felt the weight of the smoke rising, carrying more than just words. It carried a plea, a gamble. The night air seemed to shift. Owls went quiet. Somewhere in the dark, a branch cracked, not of the wind but of footsteps. Maren's hand went to her rifle. Kai raised a hand, calm. "They come." Out of the tree line, shadows emerged. 3 at first, then 5, then more. Silent figures with painted faces and watchful eyes, moving like the night itself. Maren's breath caught. For the first time, she was not facing them across a rifle sight, but standing before them open and unarmed. Kai stepped forward, speaking in his tongue, his voice firm but respectful. He gestured to her once, sharp and deliberate, every gaze turned to Maren. The war table lay between them, lines in the dirt drawn by hands from two worlds. Now the choice would be made, whether those lines became a wall or a bond. The tribe gathered in a half-circle around the fire, their faces painted in shades of earth and ash, eyes sharp and measuring. The smoke from the sage curled high above them, drifting into the black sweep of sky. Maren stood alone on her side of the fire, every instinct telling her to grip her rifle, yet her hands stayed empty at her sides. Kai spoke first, his words low and fluid in his people's tongue. The rhythm of his voice carried the weight of truth, though Maren could not follow each syllable. Still, she felt the tension in the air, like a bow drawn and waiting for release. When Kai finished, he stepped back. All eyes turned to her. Maren drew in a slow breath. The fire popped, sparks leaping between them. She steadied her voice, though her throat was dry. "I know what I looked like to you," she began. "A settler. Another face from the town that's taken your ground, your rivers, your homes. I don't blame you for seeing me that way." Her gaze swept across the circle. No one moved. No one softened. "But I ain't them," she pressed on. "I've lived outside their walls near all my life. They called me strange, unfit, too wild for their world. Truth is, I've had more in common with the woods than with their streets. More in common with the man they call an enemy than with my own kin." The words cut her as they left her mouth, but she let them burn. "My brother rides against me," she said. "He'll come soon, with men at his back, to take what's mine and kill whoever stands beside me. I mean to stop him. But I can't do it alone." Her voice dropped, steady, unflinching. "So I ask you, not as a settler, not as kin to those who wronged you. I ask you as a woman standing on her own ground. Stand with me, and I'll stand with you, against Jonas, against every thief that calls this land theirs." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hiss of sap in the fire. At last, an elder woman stepped forward. Her hair was long, streaked silver, her face painted in lines of black across her cheeks. She studied Maren with eyes like flint. Then she took a coal from the fire, held it in her palm as if it did not burn, and drew a dark streak across Maren's brow. A murmur rippled through the circle. Kai's eyes lit, relief breaking across his face for the first time in days. He spoke quickly to Maren, voice fierce with meaning. "She marks you. Fire's oath. You are bound to us now. Your fight, our fight." The elder dropped the coal back into the flames. Maren felt the heat sear her skin, though it was not the coal, but the weight of what had just been given. Trust. Fragile. Hard-won, but real. More figures stepped forward. One by one, each adding their mark. Ashes brushed on her arms. Dirt smeared across her palms. By the time they stepped back, Maren's skin carried the story of their acceptance. When it was done, Kai turned to her, bowing his head. "Now," he said, "you are no longer two." Maren swallowed hard, her throat tight. She glanced around the circle, faces once distant now bound to hers by fire and oaths. For the first time, she felt the weight of belonging, not borrowed, not begged for, but forged in the crucible of need and defiance. The fire roared higher, as if the night itself bore witness to the pact. Blood had divided her. Fire had claimed her, and now oaths would defend her. The first sign wasn't sound, but sight. A black line on the ridge at dusk, moving slow, steady, like ants crawling across the earth. Horses, too many for peace, not near enough for mercy. Maren spotted them while checking snares with Kai. She froze, her breath tight, watching the silhouettes crest against the dying light. They did not ride fast, did not shout or fire shots. They moved like a tide, deliberate, inevitable. "Jonas," she whispered. Kai's gaze followed hers. His jaw hardened. "Yes, he comes." By nightfall, the settlers had made camp 2 valleys over. Jonas stood at the edge of the firelight, arms crossed, eyes on the stars. His men gathered near the flames, sharpening knives, whispering in low, mean voices. Barrow kicked at the dirt, restless. "Why wait, Jonas? We could ride now. Take her before she knows what's coming." Jonas shook his head. "Patience. She'll be ready tonight." Tomorrow she'll think we wait, and that's when we'll ride. Flint smirked, spitting into the fire. You mean to spook her, let her stew? Jonas's smile was cold, thin. I mean to break her twice, first in the mind, then in the flesh. The men muttered dark approval. In the shadows beyond the fire, horses stamped and snorted, restless with the smell of smoke and steel. At the homestead, Maren sat at the war table with Kai and the elders who had come. The air inside was thick, heavy with smoke and resolve. They ride heavy, Kai said. Not scouts, not raiders. All of them. Maren's hands rested on the table, knuckles white. Then they mean to end this in one strike. The elder woman who had marked Maren with the coal spoke, her voice firm. Oh, good. That is how we end them. She leaned forward, her eyes catching the firelight. We break them at their charge. Make the land eat them alive. Maren nodded slowly, though her chest ached. Every plan they drew meant blood. Her brother's blood, her kin's blood. She knew there would be no turning back once the shooting started, but the shadow riders were already moving. And if she did nothing, they would trample everything she had built into the dirt. That night, Maren stepped outside alone. The moon was thin, a knife sliver hanging above the ridge. Far off, faint and eerie, she could see their campfires glowing like a second horizon. She felt the weight of it pressed down on her chest. The memory of Jonas's voice echoed in her head. When next we meet, I won't be offering words. She closed her eyes, gripping the rifle tight. Then let it be so. Behind her the door creaked. Kai stepped out silent, his presence a steadying weight. He didn't speak, didn't need to. He only looked at the fires in the distance, then at her. For the first time, Maren didn't feel alone in facing them. The shadow riders were coming, but so was she. The morning broke grey and cold, a mist clinging low across the ridge. Maren knew before the sun was fully up that Jonas would test her lines today. She felt it in the air, a tension like the world holding its breath. Kai stood with her at the bend of the trail, bow in hand, every sense alive. The first choke point lay before them, brush heavy on either side, the ground narrowing into a funnel. A place made for blood. Maren steadied her rifle against a tree, eyes sharp. They'll send scouts first, she whispered. Kai nodded. Always scouts, always sacrifice. The first rider appeared mid-morning. A lone figure on horseback, moving slow, cautious. He scanned the tree line, but his gaze slid past where Maren crouched, her rifle steady. Behind him, two more followed, each with rifles across their saddles. They rode straight into the funnel. Maren's pulse thundered in her ears. She let the first pass, waiting for the second to reach the mark carved into the tree. When he did, she squeezed the trigger. The crack split the silence. The rider pitched from his saddle, his horse screaming as it bolted. Before the echo died, Kai loosed an arrow. It flew swift and clean, striking the third rider in the throat. He toppled soundlessly, blood dark against his shirt. The first rider wheeled his horse, panic in his eyes. He spurred hard, trying to retreat, but the trail narrowed too fast. The animal reared, hooves thrashing. Maren was already reloading. She brought the rifle up, sighted, and fired. The man dropped like a sack. The mist swallowed the noise, but the horse's cries carried far. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire, because it was the silence of men waiting, listening, calculating. Back at their camp, Jonas heard the shots. He didn't flinch, didn't bark orders. He only stood still, jaw tight, listening to the faint echoes roll across the ridge. Flint spat. Scouts are down. Jonas's expression didn't shift. Good, means she's where I thought she'd be, Barrow growled low. Then we ride? Jonas shook his head. Not yet. Let her think she's won something. Let her sharpen her teeth. When we strike, it won't be with 3 men. It'll be with all of us. His men muttered uneasily, but Jonas's calm was iron. He poured himself a drink, slow, deliberate. The first clash is hers. The last will be mine. At the homestead, Kai cleaned his arrows in silence while Maren reloaded. Her hands steady but her stomach churning. They'll come harder now, she said quietly. Kai glanced at her, his voice low, certain. Good, let them. But Maren felt the weight of it settling on her chest. The first clash had been theirs. The next would not be so easy. The lines in the dirt had held. But the storm was only beginning to break. By dusk, the woods no longer carried birdsong. The silence was a herald, and Maren knew the storm was on its way. She and Kai stood side by side near the cabin, the tribe's warriors scattered in the trees, hidden but ready. Every trap had been laid, every line drawn. Still, Maren's heart drummed hard in her chest. She had spent her life hunting, defending, surviving, but never against her own blood. The thunder of hooves came first. Then the shapes of riders breaking through the mist, torches in hand. Jonas led them, tall in the saddle, his face set in stone. A dozen men fanned out behind him, rifles slung, their eyes sharp with hunger and hate. Bring her out. Jonas's voice rolled like thunder across the yard. Bring her out, and maybe the rest of you walk away. Maren stepped forward, rifle cradled in her arms, her feet planted firm in the dirt. I'm already out, Jonas. The torchlight flickered across his face. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something, sorrow perhaps, or the ghost of memory, but it was gone as quick as it came. You've made your bed, Jonas called. Now lie in it. He raised his hand, and the riders surged forward. The first wave came hard, horses pounding, rifles cracking in the night. But the ground was theirs, not Maren's. The riders didn't see the pits Kai had dug beneath loose brush until horses stumbled and men toppled screaming into sharpened stakes. Arrows hissed from the trees, sharp and merciless. One man dropped clutching his chest, another pitched sideways with a shaft in his neck. Panic rippled through the charge, but the momentum drove them on. Maren dropped to one knee, rifle to her shoulder. She sighted, fired, one rider fell, reload, fire, another down. The rhythm steadied her, though every shot carved another piece out of her soul. The air filled with smoke and blood. Horses screamed, men cursed, the crack of rifles mixing with the whine of arrows. The homestead's yard became a churn of chaos, firelight dancing on steel and flesh. Jonas held back, watching from the ridge. His eyes narrowed as he saw his men falter, the traps spring, the lines hold. His jaw clenched. She's got more help than I reckoned. Barrow growled beside him, blood splattered across his cheek. Jonas didn't answer. He only spurred his horse forward, drawing his pistol. If his men couldn't break her, he would. At the cabin door, Maren slammed another round into her rifle. A rider broke through the line, torch raised high. He meant to set the cabin aflame. She fired. The torch tumbled from his hand, sputtering in the dirt. The rider fell with a hollow thud, but more pressed in, shadows at the edge of the yard. The siege had only begun. Kai loosed arrow after arrow, his face calm, relentless. They come again, he said, voice low. Maren lifted her rifle, chest heaving. Then let them come. The siege was no longer a storm on the horizon. It was here, hammering at her door, led by her own blood, and she would not yield. The night was torn open with fire. Torches burned along the ridge, casting a hungry glow across the yard. Smoke curled through the trees, thick and acrid. The world narrowed to firelight, blood, and steel. Maren's rifle bucked against her shoulder, shot after shot cutting into the wave of riders. She no longer counted bullets, only bodies. Her ears rang with the thunder of guns, the whine of arrows, the screams of men and horses. Still they came. A settler broke through the tree line, charging with axe raised high. Maren swung her rifle like a club, the crack of wood against bone, sharp in the night. The man staggered, and Kai's arrow found him a breath later, dropping him cold. More to the west, Kai called, already reaching for another shaft. His voice was steady, but his arms bled where a bullet had grazed him. Maren's breath came hard, her chest burning. She didn't have time to think, only to move, fire, reload, strike. But when the next wave parted, she froze. Jonas. He rode at the front, pistol in one hand, his face carved from stone, eyes burning with fury. The years of blood between them seemed to collapse in that single moment. Childhood games in the creek, their father's hand on their shoulders, the bitter divide that had grown into a canyon. Maren, he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. You could have bent. You could have come home. She lifted her rifle, sighted down the barrel, and felt her hands tremble. Jonas raised his pistol. For a breath, The world slowed to silence. Brother and sister, sights locked, a lifetime hanging between them. The shot rang out, 2 shots near as one. Marin's shoulder jolted back. Her shot went wide, splintering a fence post. Jonas's bullet tore through her sleeve, hot fire grazing her arm. The moment broke. Men surged between them, the fight swallowing the siblings whole. Marin staggered back, teeth gritted against the pain. Blood soaked her sleeve, but she refused to fall. She grabbed another cartridge, rammed it into the rifle, and fired at the rider, barreling down on her. He toppled, horse crashing into the dirt, her vision blurred with smoke, with tears she would not admit to. She had looked down the barrel at her brother and flinched. The truth of it seared deeper than the wound in her arm. Kai appeared at her side, dragging her behind the cabin wall. His face was grim, his arm bloodied, but his eyes were sharp. "You live," he said. "Barely," she rasped, clutching her arm. "You must finish it," Kai said, voice hard. "Not me, not them, you!" She swallowed against the weight of it. Fire roared around them, the screams of men echoing into the night. Yonda's shadow still moved through the smoke, rallying his riders, calling for her blood. Marin pressed her back against the wall, heart hammering. Fire licked the edges of her home, smoke stinging her eyes. The battle was no longer about land, no longer about tribe or town. It was about blood. The cabin shuddered under the force of boots slamming against the door. Wood splintered, hinges groaned. Smoke seeped through the chinks in the walls, the air thick with ash and gunpowder. Marin stood in the center of the room, her rifle clutched tight despite the blood trailing down her arm. Kai and 2 warriors held fast near the windows, arrows nocked, knives at the ready. But she knew this was not their fight to finish. Another crash. The door buckled, the bar holding it snapping free. The wood swung wide, and Jonas strode through, pistol in hand, his men flooding behind him like a wave of fire and fury. "Marin!" he bellowed, his voice raw. "Enough of this." She stepped forward, rifle raised. Her heart pounded, not just with fear, but with grief, with rage, with the weight of everything left unsaid. "This is my land, Jonas," she said, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "It was never yours to take." Jonas's eyes burned. "It was always ours, Marin. You turned your back on blood. For what, for them?" He jerked his pistol toward Kai, toward the warriors. "You'd stand with strangers against your kin." "They're not strangers," she said. "They stood when you only took." The room erupted. Gunfire cracked, arrows flew, steel clashed. Kai's blade flashed as he met a settler head-on, cutting him down. Another warrior drove an arrow point-blank into a man's chest. Marin and Jonas. The night gave way to grey dawn, soft and cold, the smoke rising from the homestead curling into the pale sky. What had been a place of wood and labor, of sweat and solitude, now lay scarred by fire and blood. The yard was littered with broken tools, shattered glass, and the bodies of men who had come to claim what was not theirs. Marin stood at the threshold of her cabin, what was left of it, her rifle hanging loosely in her hand. Her arm was bound with cloth, the wound still throbbing, but she felt every pain more sharply in her chest than in her flesh. Jonas's body lay covered by a tattered blanket near the fence line. She had not yet found the courage to bury him. Brother, enemy, both truths, both heavy. Kai approached quietly, his steps steady on the churned soil. His own wounds had been wrapped, his face drawn with exhaustion. The other warriors were gathering what they could, tending to their fallen, their movements solemn, deliberate. He stopped beside her. "It is done," he said simply. Marin nodded, though her eyes stayed fixed on the ruins. "Done," she echoed, her voice raw. "But nothing feels finished." Kai studied her for a long moment. "War leaves no finish. Only what you choose after." The words sank into her like stones. She looked at the land, the ridges, the trees, the scorched boards of her homestead. For so long she had fought for it, clawed for a place of her own. And now, after blood and fire, she wondered if the land itself had asked for any of it. Her gaze drifted to Jonas beneath the blanket. They had shared a childhood once, dreams once. And now, because of choices, hers, his, everyone's, he was gone. The cost of standing firm was written in blood on the ground. Kai placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your people turned from you. I stood with you. That makes you more than one thing. Maren finally turned to meet his eyes. There was no judgment there, no pity, only a quiet understanding, the kind that came from standing in fire and surviving it. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Maybe I don't belong to either, she said softly. Maybe I just belong here. Kai's lips curved, not quite a smile, but close. Here can be enough. The morning sun crept over the horizon, washing the land in gold. Smoke still rose, but in the light it seemed less like ruin and more like cleansing. Maren sheathed her knife, set her rifle aside, and finally allowed herself to kneel by Jonas's body. Her hands trembled as she pulled back the blanket, her breath catching at the sight of his still face. For a long moment she only sat there, grief tightening her chest until she could hardly breathe. Then she dug. With bare hands at first, then with tools, she turned the earth. She buried him herself, each shovelful of soil a weight she laid upon her own soul. When it was done, she stood over the grave, silent, no prayers, no words, only the wind through the trees. By the time she returned to the cabin, the warriors had begun to leave, their work finished. Kai lingered, his eyes steady on her. You will rebuild, he asked. Maren looked at the blackened boards, the broken roof, the ashes still warm. She thought of how long it would take, of the loneliness that would settle again when the tribe departed, of the ghosts that would never leave. And then she squared her shoulders. Yes, she said. Kai bowed his head, a gesture of respect. Then he turned, and with his people he faded back into the trees, leaving her standing alone in the yard, alone, but not as before. The land had taken blood. The land had given pain, but it had also given her a place, and in that place she would remain. Maren stood with the sun at her back, the ashes at her feet, and for the first time she felt something like belonging. Not to a town, not to a family, not even to a tribe, but to herself, and in that she was free.
Thank you for being here and sharing this story with me. If you're ready for more, just click on the next one waiting for you right now. And please remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so we can keep exploring new stories together.